A homeless girl slept with a billionaire and got pregnant. His mother hated her so much that she tried to murder the pregnant girl. "Crush that Catherine Dexter shouted at her driver as soon as Zoe stepped on the road with her hands on her pregnant belly. The driver obeyed her command. Zoe heard the sound of screeching tires and saw the blinding lights of the car approaching her. And she was hit by the speeding car. As Zoe lay on the street bleeding and the car drove past, the car window rolled down just for a few seconds. Catherine Dexter, Blaine's mother, looked out the window, spat on her, and said, You wanted to trap my precious boy." This was the night Zoe Fuller disappeared from Blaine Dexter's life when his mother, Catherine Dexter, tried to murder her. Catherine could never accept Zoe into her life, and Zoe knew it. Sometime earlier, when Zoe and Blaine were still together, Zoe tried to tell him, "She thinks I am a who trapped her precious boy, Blaine. I am nothing to her. She treats me the same way she treats the lady who cleans her toilets. Your mother can't stand to look at me in public," Zoe Fuller said, tearing Blaine Dexter's hands away from her neck as he was trying to put a necklace on her. Blaine's mother, Catherine Dexter, had humiliated her in public, and he was taking the brunt of Zoe's anger. Zoe continued, "So no, I don't want your stupid diamond necklace." "It's just a small diamond, Zoe. It's not that expensive," Blaine said, and immediately realized it was a poor choice of words. "Not that expensive. But I am poor, Blaine. It's expensive to me," Zoe angrily replied to Blaine. Blaine gently rested his arms on Zoe's shoulders as he tactfully put the necklace on her, and then, feeling the soft skin at the back of her neck, he slid his hands to her back. He smiled a little and said to her, "No one in the whole wide world deserves this necklace more than you, Zoe. I looked at this blue diamond, and I could think of no one but you. It's blue color like your deep blue eyes." He knew Zoe was melting. He knew how to calm her down, like she knew how to take his worries away in a flash. Catherine Dexter hated Zoe so much that she came up with a plan that would make Blaine leave Zoe. She got her driver to take pictures of Zoe, and when Blaine came home one night, Catherine Dexter invited him to her room. "Zoe Fuller is a Blaine. The whole world knows it," Catherine Dexter said angrily, pointing to the pictures spread on the table before Blaine Dexter, her son. "Please don't say that, Mother. I love Zoe," Blaine said, trying to defend Zoe. "You love Zoe. That has been sleeping around with this guy, Matthew." Catherine spat at the pictures as she said, "Can't you see? The pictures clearly show her leaving his apartment in the dead of the night." "These pictures don't mean anything, Mother," Blaine said, getting agitated by his mother trying to convince him of Zoe's infidelity. "My dear child," Catherine said, as she switched tactics and adjusted her tone to a loving mother, "your love has blinded you. I had other pictures of Zoe as well, but I burnt them. If you looked at them, it would break your heart." "What other pictures, Mother?" Blaine asked Catherine with a look of surprise on his face. She looked at Blaine, getting disturbed by the details. "Stop it, Mother! How can you be so heartless?" Tears welled up in Blaine's bloodshot eyes as he stared at Zoe's pictures spread on the table. Catherine's driver, who had been standing in the corner until now, added to Blaine's misery. "We all saw those pictures, sir. She is not the right kind of girl for you, sir. You are from a respectable family." Blaine was infuriated, hearing the driver's words. His words rang in Blaine's ears. "We all saw those pictures, sir." This girl, Zoe, was completely naked and pleasuring herself. Blaine couldn't hold back his tears anymore. With his wounded, bleeding heart, he stormed out of Catherine Dexter's room. Catherine's driver said, "Ma'am, if Blaine ever found out we are lying about that girl, Zoe," before he was interrupted by a wave of Catherine's hand. "He would never," Catherine said with a sly smile on her face. All Catherine Dexter had to do was sow the seeds of doubt in Blaine's head. His mind did the rest. And when Zoe disappeared from his life, he never looked for her. But when Zoe got pregnant with Blaine's child and tried to contact Blaine, she found Catherine Dexter standing in her way, stopping her. "You are a Your mother is a whore, and this child is a Catherine Dexter said to Zoe Fuller as rain poured down on a dark, stormy night. "How can you say that, Mrs. Dexter? This child is your flesh and blood, Zoe said, with a hand on her pregnant belly. Never. The Dexter family will never acknowledge this child, Catherine responded. This is Blaine's child and he will never let me go, Zoe protested to the insults with tears rolling down her cheeks. You beggars. We don't even know if this is Blaine's child or a spawn from that Matthew you are sleeping with. Catherine continued with her accusations. You are lying, Mrs. Dexter, and you know it, Zoe replied, disgusted. Lying? Catherine said, laughing. Blaine believes me, and my son will never accept this child. Catherine spat at Zoe. We will see about that when I talk to Blaine, Zoe retorted. Zoe Fuller, there's only one ending for this baby, and that is death. I will never let him live. And that's when Catherine Dexter decided to murder Zoe and her unborn child. How could a girl from the sewers have my son? There she is, that's... Crush her, Catherine Dexter shouted to her driver as she sat in the back seat of her car. The driver coldly replied, that whore thinks she can shove her child on my family, Catherine Dexter said, seething with anger. Are you sure, Mrs. Dexter, if your son found out we killed his unborn child? The driver asked for a confirmation. Blaine? No, my son will never know about this. Besides, he is convinced that this been sleeping with that Matthew, said Catherine, sure of her plan. We will have to wait for her to step down from the curb, on the road, said the driver. His voice was emotionless, like a professional who had done this before. Zoe Fuller was standing outside the cafe after finishing her shift as a waitress. She had locked the cafe and tucked the keys in her purse. The street outside was dark. She looked up at the streetlight that had stopped working. Catherine's driver took care of that. It was drizzling, and Zoe had her hands over her pregnant belly, trying to shield her unborn child from the rain, while her hair got soaked. She stepped onto the road, ready to walk home, which wasn't very far from the cafe. Crush that! Catherine shouted at her driver as soon as Zoe stepped on the road with her hands on her pregnant belly. The driver obeyed her command. Zoe heard the sound of screeching tires and saw the blinding lights of the car approaching her. And she was hit by the speeding car. Her body hit the hood of the car with a thud before falling on the street. As she bled profusely on the street, her blood mixing with the rain, she pulled out the phone from her pocket and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Said the voice on the phone. Only a few words came out of Zoe Fuller's mouth before her world went dark. Hit and run. Save my baby. As Zoe lay on the street bleeding and the car drove past, the car window rolled down just for a few seconds. Catherine Dexter, Blaine's mother, looked out the window, spat on her and said, You wanted to trap my precious boy. Miraculously, Zoe and her child survived the murder attempt by Catherine Dexter. Trying to get away from Catherine Dexter, Zoe left her life and love behind in Scottsdale and escaped to Phoenix. A veil of doubt was pulled over Blaine's eyes by his mother, Catherine Dexter, and he abandoned the love of his life. Zoe gave birth to a boy. She named Max. But life wasn't going to be easy for this baby, or Zoe, because Max was diagnosed with leukemia. 4 years later, another shocker awaited Zoe when she reached St. Mary's Hospital, where her son, Max, was undergoing chemotherapy. As she approached the park at the hospital to meet her son, Max, she found him sitting with a doctor on a bench in the park. She couldn't see the doctor's face, but his voice sounded strangely familiar. Could it be Blaine? But he lives in Scottsdale, not Phoenix. Her heart started playing tricks with her. She hid behind a tree to eavesdrop on their conversation. Zoe was embarrassed to see Max waving condoms in the doctor's face. Do you know what this thing is used for, doctor? I asked Mommy. But she wouldn't tell me, Max asked the doctor. Your mother is right not to tell you. The doctor replied. The doctor's voice seemed like a familiar echo from her past. She heard Blaine's words in her head after 4 years. Get out my face. I don't like women who scheme, and I don't like women who lie. I could never be with a woman who betrayed my trust. Blaine's last sentence was etched on Zoe's heart, like a wound that wouldn't heal. I could never be with a woman who betrayed my trust. She was pulled back to the present by Max's sweet voice. He was telling the doctor about her. Mommy sells these things to help cure me, so I thought I could sell these things too. Mommy says honest work is always good, and she's not embarrassed if it helps cure Max. So, can you use this thing, doctor? If you need it, you can buy it from me, and I have more too. The doctor put his hand on Max's bald head and told him, "All right, I'll buy all the things you have." "Really?" Max said, as his eyes lit up with excitement. His little hands eagerly dug around in his pockets as he pulled out. "I took these from my mommy's bag so that I could help her make money. I will give you these 18 things for an even $10. Deal?" "That sounds like a good deal." The doctor handed Max a $20 bill and said, "You can keep the rest. You drive a hard bargain, little salesman." Tears trickled down Zoe's eyes as she witnessed Max sell condoms to a doctor. But Zoe wasn't aware someone was approaching her from behind, until a hand came and patted her back. Zoe was startled and almost screamed. Even the thought of Blaine's mother, Catherine Dexter, scared her to this day. But it was only Nurse Linda, and she said to Zoe, "Welcome to the club, Zoe. I mean ogling at the brain surgeon club." Zoe heard the word brain surgeon, and the ground shifted from under her feet. Nurse Linda continued, "All the ladies are doing it. There is nothing wrong with that, but don't be heartbroken if you don't score this hunk." Nurse Linda was almost drooling. He was promoted to a professor when he came to our hospital. I also heard that his family is loaded and has a lot of political influence. He recently bought a penthouse downtown. Nurse Linda continued, "It's not like any of us stand a chance with a man like that. I'm sure he only dates women like him, gorgeous and from the right kind of family." Nurse Linda's words made Zoe freeze. Not being part of the right kind of family is what had almost gotten Zoe and Max killed. She went back home with her mind running. All she could think of was that awful night years ago when she almost got killed by Catherine Dexter. Were they truly safe now? Zoe worked at Talon Interiors as a designer. Zoe had a busy day at the office. She was just leaving her meeting when Courtney, her colleague, saw Zoe approaching. She leaped up and handed Zoe's phone to her. All she could think of was that awful night years ago when she almost got killed by Catherine Dexter. Were they truly safe now? Zoe worked at Talon Interiors as a designer. Zoe had a busy day at the office. She was just leaving her meeting when Courtney, her colleague, saw Zoe approaching. She leaped up and handed Zoe's phone to her. "Zoe, your phone has rung more than 10 times in a row." "Someone needs to talk to you," Courtney told her. "Is it the hospital calling?" Zoe quickly took the phone from Courtney. No, don't worry, I checked. If it had been the hospital, I would have come and gotten you," Courtney assured her. Zoe unlocked her phone. She let out a long sigh of relief. It was just Linda. She was her younger sister, Ziva's best friend. She quickly called Linda back. "Oh, Zoe, thank God you called back. Linda, what's going on? Is something wrong?" Zoe asked worriedly. "It's Ziva. She fell down the stairs and almost killed herself," Linda told her frantically. Linda's words exploded in Zoe's mind like a bomb. How could she just fall down the stairs? Could this be the Dexters? Even years later, Zoe could feel Catherine's threats rattle her bones. Zoe nervously asked Linda, "How badly is Ziva hurt?" "We already took her to the hospital. The doctor said her injuries weren't a big problem, but Ziva has broken her leg and had a slight concussion." Zoe was irritated. "What? And this is not a big problem?" "Which doctor said that?" she asked. "Ziva's attending doctor said that," Linda replied. "Forget it. Which hospital are you guys at?" "I'll come over right away," Zoe said, already starting to pack up her things. "St. Mary's," Linda answered. "Okay, I'm on my way." Zoe hung up and quickly told her boss why she had to leave early. Once Zoe was in her car, she called Linda back on the speaker. Something didn't feel right. "Okay, Linda, tell me what's really going on," Zoe said firmly. Going on? What do you mean, Zoe?" Linda replied awkwardly. "Tell me the truth, Linda." "The full truth," Zoe emphasized. "What did you mean when you said earlier that Ziva killed herself?" Linda sighed. "Ziva didn't fall down the stairs. She deliberately threw herself down the stairs. She wanted to injure herself, but she didn't want to die. Linda explained. "Is my sister insane?" Zoe angrily shouted. She fell in love with a brain surgeon that works at St. Mary's Hospital, but he always ignores her. Ziva wanted to get admitted to the hospital so he would have to pay attention to her, Linda explained. Brain surgeon? Was this the same brain surgeon that the nurses had been talking about last night? Something doesn't feel right, Zoe thought to herself. Zoe, I told her I thought she was crazy, but you know how Ziva is. She wouldn't listen, Linda added. What was she thinking? Zoe shouted, trembling with anger. She could have died. Ziva doesn't need a brain surgeon. She needs a shrink. The moment Zoe entered Ziva's hospital room, she angrily threw her purse onto the bedside table and glared at her sister, her arms folded across her chest. Ziva's leg was in a cast, and there was a large bandage on her forehead. Ziva, you have some serious explaining to do, Zoe told her harshly. Hi, sis, it really hurts. Ziva's eyes were red as she looked at the furious Zoe. She was trying to look pitiful to gain sympathy, but Zoe wasn't having it. Good. You deserve it for doing something so stupid. And that too, over a man. She looked at her sister's battered body. To risk your life over some guy, it's absurd. Zoe grabbed the water pitcher off the table. You're out of water. I'll go and get you some more. Zoe just wanted to calm herself down. She walked over to fix herself a cup of coffee. She was going to need caffeine to deal with her sister. Stirring in the sugar, Zoe glanced up and froze. She was staring at a man's back. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair. He wore a white doctor's coat, and his hands were casually in his pockets. Zoe stood frozen as she watched the man round the corner and disappear from view. Was that Blaine? No. It couldn't have been him, Zoe thought. Why would he be here in Phoenix? He lived in Scottsdale? Zoe shook her head. No. This was just her mind playing tricks on her, because Zoe had been thinking about Blaine and Catherine Dexter. Zoe finished making her coffee and walked back to her sister's room. Any dizziness or nausea? A deep male voice asked. Zoe's heart stopped. She would know that voice anywhere. It was him. It was Blaine Dexter. But how? Why was he in Phoenix? Zoe's chest tightened, and she forgot to breathe. My stomach is better. Ziva smiled as she answered the doctor's question. She glanced over at Zoe by the door. Sis, why are you just standing there? Come on in. Blaine bent over and aimed a small light into Ziva's eyes. Any double vision? He asked. Maybe a little, Ziva nodded and replied. Seeing the dazed Zoe still staring at Blaine's back, Ziva jokingly called out again, Sis, what are you doing? What are you staring at? Blaine still did not look back. Gathering herself, Zoe finally spoke. Ziva, are you thirsty? I got more water. Blaine stiffened when he heard Zoe's voice. He seemed stunned for a second. He turned around and locked eyes with Zoe. His dark eyes made shivers run down Zoe's back. Her heart was beating wildly. She had thought that she would never be looking into Blaine's eyes again. Zoe was sure her face reflected her emotional upheaval. Blaine seemed remarkably calm by comparison. Blaine's eyes showed his shock only for a moment before returning to normal. It was as if Zoe's sudden appearance hadn't affected him. Was he here by chance? Or was there something sinister going on behind his calm exterior? Zoe tried to calm herself down. You're Ziva's sister, Blaine asked her. That voice. Zoe had always loved Blaine's voice. Yes, Zoe answered, trying to hide the nervousness from her voice. I am her older sister. Blaine turned back around to continue examining Ziva. Your sister may need to stay in the hospital for observation for a few more days. Okay, thank you, Zoe politely replied. She tried to sound as cool and calm as Blaine, but Zoe feared she was failing miserably. Ziva watched her sister curiously. She had no idea of Zoe's traumatic past with the Dexters. Zoe, this is Dr. Blaine Dexter, my attending physician. Zoe didn't realize how much her hand had been shaking from nervousness until she tried to set her coffee down, and hot liquid spilled all over the back of her hand. She silently screamed inside as a burning pain shot through her hand. Zoe quickly hid her hand behind her back as she turned around. But then suddenly she felt a cool touch. It was Blaine, and he was holding Zoe's hand. Zoe's hand was burning up, but it wasn't just the burn on her hand causing Zoe's discomfort, but Blaine's strong fingers wrapped around hers. His touch was cool, but Zoe felt hot and flushed all over. Her entire body had tensed at Blaine's touch. Zoe wanted to break free, but found herself unable to resist his closeness. The burn doesn't look that serious. You'll likely have blistering, but the burn should heal without scarring. The cream will help with the discomfort, Blaine told her. His voice was cold and clinical. Kelly, take Miss Fuller's sister and put some burn cream on her wound. Blaine released Zoe's hand and turned to instruct the young nurse who had entered the room a moment ago. Right this way, miss, Kelly urged Zoe. No, really, I'm fine. Zoe politely refused. She smiled at the nurse. It's just a little burn. I'll put cream on it when I get home. It is not just a little problem, Blaine said, as he finished looking at Ziva's CT scan and walked back toward them. You need to be careful. It's a minor burn now, but if left untreated, it could become infected, causing fever and other complications which some cream won't be able to solve. Zoe pursed her lips and looked at him. He was being paranoid, but she remained polite. Then perhaps Dr. Dexter would be kind enough to write me a prescription, and I'll take the burn cream with me. He gave a curt nod. Kelly will put in a prescription, and you can pick it up at the hospital pharmacy on your way out. The nurse left the room to do what Blaine asked. Blaine unhooked the clipboard hanging on the foot of Ziva's hospital bed and wrote on it. Your CT scan looks good. I see no injury to the brain. I'll have the nurse arrange to have you moved to the orthopedics department for observation. What? Why? Ziva asked in alarm. I thought you said I'd need to stay here for a few days. She had only just arrived at the hospital. Ziva hadn't had time to confess her feelings to Blaine yet. She would lose her chance if she were transferred to a different department so quickly. All her suffering would be in vain, Ziva thought. But, Dr. Dexter, I'm still feeling very uncomfortable, Ziva protested. I don't... Blaine cut her off before she could continue. Ziva, every bed in my department is very precious. Every bed is used to save lives and treat real injuries. But Ziva felt wronged and wanted to explain. I heard you like me? Blaine suddenly changed the subject. Ziva looked at him in surprise. Zoe immediately felt nervous. She didn't want to hear what Blaine would say next. It's not going to happen, so don't waste your time or mine. I don't like women like you. Blaine glanced indifferently at the cast on Ziva's leg and chuckled without humor. How could you think I would like a woman that would be stupid enough to risk her own life for a man? I don't like women who scheme, and I don't like women who lie. I could never be with a woman who betrayed my trust. As he spoke the last sentence, Blaine looked meaningfully at Zoe, who had gone pale. I could never be with a woman who betrayed my trust. Zoe's chest burned painfully, and her ears rang. His sentence was achingly familiar. Blaine's words from 4 years ago still haunted her. Zoe, I could never be with a woman who betrayed my trust. Zoe tried to contain her anger. She was suspicious about Blaine. Could he really not know what his mother had done to Zoe or Max? I already have a girlfriend, Blaine finished. Blaine had a girlfriend? Ziva had started crying at Blaine's harsh words. Have your sister help you pack your things, Ziva. Get ready to change rooms this evening. With these final words, Blaine turned around and left the room without looking back. No matter what, I'm not giving up, Ziva shouted stubbornly at his back. Turning on Zoe, Ziva asked her sister coldly, Did you tell him that I purposely fell down the stairs? No. When would I have had the chance? But I'm glad he knows, Zoe admitted. She got up and started to pack Ziva's things before adding, This is for your good. You need to forget about him, Ziva. What do you mean this is for my good? Ziva became anxious and shouted at Zoe. Who do you think you are? Do you want him for yourself now? I saw you staring at him. Ziva's voice was filled with tearful anger as she reprimanded her older sister. Zoe froze. Every question Ziva asked was like a sharp blade stabbing Zoe in the heart. Admit it, Zoe. You like him, and you want him for yourself. If you do, just say it. You don't need to stab me in the back, Ziva shouted. There was a bone-chilling coldness in Zoe's eyes. You should stay away from him. Ziva didn't know how dangerous the Dexters were. Zoe simply didn't want to see her younger sister get hurt. Zoe didn't want her sister threatened, frightened, and harassed by others day and night. No one should have to experience what Zoe had been through. But Zoe didn't say any of this. Ziva didn't know about her and Blaine, and she couldn't. Zoe threw down the clothes in her hands and headed for the door. I'm going to see Max. And she walked out the door. Zoe walked blindly, her mind reeling. Realizing she was heading in the opposite direction of her son's room, Zoe stopped and leaned against the corridor wall. Blaine had a girlfriend. Zoe didn't know why this had come as such a shock to her. It had been 4 years. Blaine was extremely handsome and successful. He had moved on. Why wouldn't he? She should think of this as a good thing. This meant they both had new lives, and that she was most likely safe from Catherine Dexter. Zoe wiped her eyes and straightened. She began to walk towards Max's room. Seeing Blaine today was just a fluke of fate. Zoe thought to herself, Max's room was in a different wing, 3 stories up, and Ziva was being moved to a different department. They would never run into Blaine. Zoe picked up her pace, cheered by the thought of seeing her son. Yep. After today, Zoe would never have to see Blaine again. But fate had different plans for Zoe. Zoe knocked on the open door of her boss's office the next week. Hey, Talon, I heard you wanted to see me. Seeing Zoe standing in the open doorway, Talon smiled and waved her in. Yes, come on in, sit down. I wanted to talk to you about a new client. Talon was not only the chief designer, but also the owner of Taylor Interiors. Talon handed Zoe a file. A new client came in I think is a great fit for your design aesthetic. He lives in the new skyscraper downtown. The contact that referred him to us indicated money is no object, so he sounds like my perfect kind of client. Talon grinned at Zoe. Hopefully, if this goes well, he'll refer us to all his rich friends. Zoe laughed. Sounds great. I can't wait to get started. Excellent. The client wants to meet for dinner tonight to discuss his project at 6 p.m. at the Waterford International Hotel. His contact details are in the file. Talon finished. Thank you, I got this. Zoe replied gratefully as she stood up to leave. As she was headed to the door, Talon called her back. Hey Zoe, one more thing. A quick warning. My friend indicated this client could be a bit picky, but with your style and attentiveness, I'm sure you'll be fine. I won't let you down, Zoe replied. After squeezing in a visit with Max, Zoe left to meet her new client. Zoe arrived at the hotel with only a few minutes to spare. Walking into the lobby, Zoe was reaching into her bag to pull out the file and call her client when she suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Zoe blinked in disbelief at the man casually sitting by the wall of windows. It was Blaine. What was he doing here? Was he following Zoe for some reason? Zoe had managed to avoid him all week at the hospital, only for Blaine to now be sitting in the same hotel as her client meeting. Realizing he hadn't seen her yet, Zoe frantically looked around for a place to hide. Zoe quickly headed the opposite way and glanced back in Blaine's direction, only to find him now looking right at her. Their eyes met, and Zoe's panic was written all over her face. She didn't have the time to cover it up. Zoe hurriedly sat down, facing away from Blaine. Zoe took the client's file out of her bag and was about to call him when her phone vibrated with an incoming call. When Zoe saw the number on her caller ID, she was stunned. That phone number was etched in Zoe's memory. It was Blaine, but Zoe had changed her phone number when she ran away 4 years ago. So how did Blaine have her number now? Zoe turned around and looked at him. Blaine was looking at her indifferently, waiting for Zoe to pick up. Zoe finally pressed the answer button. Are we going to discuss my project by shouting at each other across the room? Or are you going to join me? Blaine's voice was low, but its rich tenor was unmistakable. What? Zoe was confused. Well, if I had wanted to talk over the phone, I wouldn't have asked you to meet me here, Blaine said impatiently. No, Zoe thought. It couldn't be him. She hurriedly opened her new client's file. Seeing the name on the paperwork, Zoe's stomach sank. Blaine Dexter was her new client. Miss Fuller, Do you always show up to client meetings this unprepared? If so, I can't say this is an auspicious start to this project. Blaine was pissed. I'm so sorry. Zoe quickly apologized. I'll be right there. Zoe quickly grabbed her things and walked to where Blaine sat waiting. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was you. Zoe apologized again. Blaine remained seated, watching Zoe with his dark eyes, but saying nothing. Was this a twist of fate? Or was there something sinister going on that Zoe wasn't aware of? Zoe quickly scrambled to work. Dr. Dexter, do you have any specific ideas for your home's design? Starting with a blank slate can be so exciting. Do you prefer a modern or a more classical look? There are so many styles to choose from. Zoe continued to ramble. She shoved her portfolio into Blaine's hands. These are recent examples of my work. If you see anything that catches your eye, let me know. I can do any type of design you might want. Zoe finally stopped talking. She was out of breath and wished there was a hole in the hotel lobby she could crawl into. Blaine didn't open Zoe's portfolio. Finally, he spoke. Right now, what I want is food. I'm hungry. Let's eat first. Blaine stood up and started walking towards the hotel restaurant. Zoe stood there in surprise for a moment before she quickly grabbed her portfolio and hurried after him. After the restaurant's host seated them, Zoe tried to offer Blaine another apology. I'm sorry about earlier. I was rude. I'm not usually that, talkative. Zoe finished awkwardly. Blaine didn't look at Zoe. Never mind, this was unexpected, to say the least. The waiter approached and asked Zoe what she would like to order. She shook her head at him with a polite smile. Just sparkling water for me, please. Blaine frowned at Zoe's response and then proceeded to order a wide variety of dishes. Please bring 2 plates. She will be sharing with me. Really, Dr. Dexter, I'm fine. You didn't need to order all that food, Zoe protested. Blaine ignored her objection. The server returned quickly with their food. Zoe couldn't help it when her stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since breakfast and rarely went out, as every dollar she made went towards Max's treatments. Zoe blushed. Blaine glanced at her face but didn't comment. Instead, he put generous helpings of the various items on Zoe's plate. Was he fattening the pig up for slaughter? Zoe picked up her fork and took several bites, but when she looked up again, she saw Blaine wasn't eating. She couldn't help but ask, I thought you were hungry. Why aren't you eating? I don't want to eat right now. Don't worry about me. Blaine calmly replied, then looked out the window and no longer spoke. Zoe's intuition told her Blaine wasn't in a good mood. Is everything all right? Zoe asked him tentatively. Blaine turned and looked at her. I'm not trying to pry, Zoe told him gently. Blaine didn't reply. Seeing that Blaine didn't want to talk about it, Zoe didn't say anything else. She just quietly looked down and resumed eating. She shouldn't be concerned about Blaine, but she couldn't help herself. Her mind was in chaos because of him. Blaine's gaze fell on Zoe's lowered face. She was nervous. Thinking it was time to discuss his project, Zoe opened her mouth to speak, only for Blaine's phone to vibrate on the table with an incoming call. Blaine picked up the phone and spoke into it silently. Zoe couldn't tell what the conversation was. Blaine quickly hung up the phone. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a bunch of bills, dropping them on the table. I have a patient that needs emergency surgery. Blaine put away his phone and stood up. He looked down at Zoe. About the renovation of my place, I will contact you when I have more time to talk. Okay. Zoe nodded. Blaine nodded and left the table, heading straight for the exit. Zoe only looked away when Blaine's straight and broad back disappeared. Watching him leave, she felt a sense of loss, but she also felt fear. 4 years later, fate had decided to bring them together. She could escape Blaine at the hospital, but now that he was her client, Zoe couldn't ignore him. Was this premeditated? Zoe switched off her thoughts and left for home. Zoe arrived home from the hotel and walked into the living room, where her mother and Ziva were watching TV. Mom, I got a new part-time job. I only came home to change, and then I'm heading out again. Don't wait up for me. I'm not coming back tonight. I'm going to the hospital to see Max after I get off work, Zoe announced. Zoe, you work too hard. Her mother, Gloria, told her sighing. You are a good girl. Why do you torture yourself like this? Mom, I'm fine, really. You raised a strong daughter. Zoe comforted her mother. Gloria turned to Zoe hopefully. Our neighbor Mrs. Bonando's nephew is available. He's 38, divorced, and a single father. He sounds like a good prospect who is worth meeting. Shall I arrange a blind date for you two? Zoe's heart hurt when she heard her mother's earnest words. Mom, it's not that I don't want to go on a date. It's just that Max's current physical condition complicates things. I would never want to be a burden to someone else. It just wouldn't feel right. Zoe explained. Ziva frowned in response. Zoe, Mom and I advised you to give up your baby. You refused to listen to us. Now he is sick, and you have this burden to carry. What if all the stress caused? Before Ziva could finish, Gloria cut her off. Ziva, stop it. You're talking nonsense. If Max ever heard you say such things, how sad he would be. Ziva had enough decency to know she'd gone too far. Zoe, you know I love Max. I didn't mean that. Zoe nodded. I know that both you and Mom are worried about me. All right. I promise you that once Max's leukemia is cured, I will immediately go on as many dates as you can find me, okay? Zoe smiled at them before she hurried off to change her clothes. However, Gloria and Ziva had no idea that Zoe was in fact working with Max's father now. Zoe wondered if it was fate that brought them together. But Zoe couldn't concern herself with this. She only cared about Max. And to treat Max, she had to run after her biggest client to date, Blaine Dexter. The next day, Zoe called Blaine to set up an appointment. Blaine was surprised to see that Zoe was calling him. Hello? Blaine answered. Zoe jumped straight to the point. Do you have time this week to show me the space, Dr. Dexter? I need to see the layout of the rooms and take measurements. I'm about to go into surgery, Blaine told her. The operation should take about 3 hours. Meet me at the fountain at the entrance of the hospital at 5 o'clock. 3 hours later, Zoe arrived at the hospital fountain right on time. She found a bench and sat down. Time passed, but still no Blaine. Zoe was bathed in the lazy sunset and almost fell asleep. Checking her watch, she saw it was almost 6 o'clock. She'd been waiting an hour. Was the surgery not over yet? Zoe was just about to head home, figuring Blaine had gotten stuck in surgery, when she was approached by another doctor. Zoe was surprised. Excuse me, are you Zoe Fuller? The doctor asked. The doctor was young, probably fresh out of medical school, she thought. Yes, I'm Zoe. She nodded. Who are you? I am Dr. Dexter's surgical resident, Dr. Jose Ramirez. He asked me to look for you. His operation is running long, and it might be another hour or two. He said you should go to his home and wait. Jose took out the key to Blaine's apartment from his pocket. Was Zoe stepping foot into a trap? Was Blaine planning something against Zoe? Or will Blaine force Zoe to tell the truth about why she ran away years ago? Will Zoe and Max be in danger because of Blaine?
To listen to the full audio series, install the Pocket FM app now.
Pocket FM. Download the app now.